Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Donc bienvenue à cette édition 2024 des MIAI Days. Donc 2 journées qui sont consacrées un petit peu à l'activité passée de MIAI. Je dirais quelques mots un petit peu plus tard sur le futur de MIAI. Comme vous le savez, nous avons été élus IA Cluster et nous aurons une inauguration un peu plus officielle de ce cluster à la rentrée. Pour l'instant, je vais inviter Yacine Naknesh à nous rejoindre, qui est président de l'UGA. L'UGA, c'est l'Université Grenoble-Alpes, c'est l'université qui porte le projet MIAI et qui porte aussi le projet IA Cluster. Et Yacine a eu la gentillesse de venir nous dire quelques mots à ce sujet.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. Je ne vais pas être très très lent. Donc, la langue, c'est le français. Ok, ça marche très bien. Bon, voilà, je vais tout simplement, je voulais dire que l'aventure MIAI est une aventure qui est réussie. Je pense qu'au-delà des critères qui ont été utilisés par le jury, par rapport à ça, je pense que l'esprit de MIAI qui cherche à impliquer le maximum de personnes et avoir une dynamique la plus large possible est quelque chose de très important. Il faut rester là-dessus. Je suis convaincu que pour MIAI Cluster, la suite sera bâtie là-dessus. Je pense aussi que le positionnement de MIAI qui a été sur des questions qui est à la fois fondamental à l'appliquer, mais en mettant l'humain et l'environnement au centre en termes de recherche extrêmement important. Et je pense que MIAI Cluster va dans ce sens et c'est même d'aller plus loin, et puis on en parlera par rapport à ça. Ça, c'est extrêmement important. C'est important de pouvoir conjuguer des sujets scientifiques, des problèmes scientifiques avec des enjeux socio-économiques, et en l'occurrence l'humain et l'environnement. C'est extrêmement important par rapport à ça. Donc je pense que tout cet esprit-là de MIAI a été très réussi. MIAI, quelque part, comment dire, il reste quelque chose de magique, parce que MIAI, avec toute l'activité et le volume d'activité qu'il y avait dans MIAI, qu'il y a dans MIAI et qu'il y aura encore plus peut-être dans MIAI Cluster, avec toute cette activité-là, ça a fonctionné d'une manière où en fait il y avait très peu de problèmes qui remontaient. Et que c'était un bon signe. C'est un bon signe d'un fonctionnement d'une communauté, au fait. Et pour moi, ça a été quelque chose qui est de très frappant. C'est-à-dire que c'est une communauté qui a réussi à trouver la façon de travailler ensemble, de faire avancer les choses, etc. Bon, des structures beaucoup plus petites que MIAI, que ce soit en termes de personnes impliquées ou en termes de financement, j'ai souvent remonté beaucoup plus de problèmes que cela. Et ça, pour moi, c'est en tout cas un signe de maturité et de la bonne santé d'une communauté scientifique qui a trouvé les règles et le fonctionnement pour travailler ensemble et de produire une très belle science, puisque en préparant MIAI Cluster, il y a eu un travail qui a été fait, bien sûr, pour faire une forme d'auto-évaluation par rapport au MIAI. Et c'est très clair que le centre MIAI 3IA est un des centres qui a eu le plus d'impact, de production scientifique, de relations avec la société, de relations avec les acteurs socio-économiques, en termes de formation, etc. Et ça, c'est extrêmement important. Donc voilà, donc par rapport à ça, je voulais remercier toutes celles et tous ceux qui ont participé au bon fonctionnement du MIAI. Bien entendu, en premier, Eric Gossier, donc Eric qui a été à l'origine dès le début du projet avec d'autres, et que ça a continué. Maintenant, il y a d'autres qui s'y impliquent. Donc je vois la Sophie, donc, qui va s'impliquer qui est déjà impliquée et qui était déjà impliquée dans MIAI, mais qui l'apprend. Son implication est plus importante, et je pense que je suis convaincu, je suis confiant que cet esprit de fonctionner comme une communauté scientifique soudée restera et sera préservé, et ça continuera. Alors MIAI Cluster, c'est encore plus, on va dire, encore plus large, puisque à la fois il y a l'aspect formation qui prend une place encore plus importante que MIAI. MIAI initialement c'était que la formation, que la recherche et la valorisation. Après, il y a eu des projets en lien avec MIAI. Enfin, il y avait une partie formation qui était beaucoup plus réduite. Après, il y a eu d'autres projets comme Ephilia, comme d'autres qui étaient beaucoup plus orientés formation, qui sont venus à côté de MIAI. Mais là aussi, l'interaction entre les différents projets a été très bonne. MIAI Cluster, tout est intégré. C'est à la fois recherche, valorisation et beaucoup de formation. et avec des enjeux, des objectifs côté formation. Je cherche Tang, il est là. Voilà, des enjeux côté formation qui, loin d'être triviaux, en termes d'impact sur la formation, ça va demander beaucoup de réflexion et beaucoup d'échanges par rapport à ça. Et je dirais que MIAI prend maintenant aussi une autre dimension au niveau de la région, avec l'arrivée de 2 nouveaux partenaires, l'USMB et Clermont. Je cherche les collègues. Voilà. USMB, quelqu'un de Chambéry qui est là? À moitié. Et côté Clermont, les collègues Clermont sont, voilà, ils sont plusieurs qui sont là. Donc ça aussi quelque chose d'important que on arrive à, peut-être on y arrivera. Donc on arrive à faire quelque chose qui est plus large. Peut-être qu'on arrivera aussi à discuter avec Lyon, qui ont déposé leur projet, et qu'on puisse faire quelque chose au niveau de la région globalement. C'est très important par rapport à ça. Voilà, donc c'est ce que je voulais dire. Je pense qu'il y a eu un travail extrêmement important dans un esprit qui, pour moi, est un esprit exceptionnel, très positif, qui est inclusif, qui cherche à laisser personne à côté du chemin, à côté de la route, d'impliquer le maximum possible de personnes. Maintenant, il y a de nouveaux enjeux, il y a de nouveaux objectifs qui sont encore plus ambitieux et que cet esprit sera certainement préservé et qui nous aidera beaucoup à avancer. Avec tous les acteurs au niveau du site ici, mais au-delà, avec les acteurs au niveau de la région, et en particulier Chambéry et Clermont.
Merci beaucoup Yacine pour ces gentils mots. Et ces paroles d'espoir pour la suite de MIAI, et je suis aussi confiant là-dessus. Du coup, je vais peut-être, avant de passer à une petite introduction de ce qu'on a fait, puis de ce que sera MIAI Cluster, je voulais juste... Non, c'est pas le bon. Je voulais juste présenter je voulais présenter le programme d'abord. Si c'était possible. On a 2 ordinateurs, donc on va jongler en permanence entre les 2 types de présentation. Et un petit mot sur la langue, donc on va jongler aussi entre l'anglais et le français. Je pense que les présentations plus institutionnelles seront en français, et on aura ensuite les exposés plus scientifiques en anglais. Voilà, donc le programme, vous le voyez ici. Donc une petite introduction, ensuite une série de présentations scientifiques. Et là, ce sont des scientifiques qui ont œuvré, et largement œuvré, qui ont beaucoup contribué au succès de MIAI. Ensuite, on aura un temps sur l'IA et l'éducation. Et puis un temps où la région nous rejoindra, donc Catherine Staron, qui est vice-présidente recherche, si je ne dis pas de bêtises, pour la région, avec Serge Vert, qui est le directeur de Minalogique. Et puis ensuite, buffet. Et puis l'après-midi, on aura un temps sur l'éthique en IA dans le monde académique, avec un débat entre Laurence de Villers de Sorbonne Université, puis la chaire IA éthique de MIAI. Un temps avec des présentations de partenaires industriels. Et puis ensuite une pause et une table ronde sur les enjeux de la formation continue en IA. Donc vous voyez qu'on a des temps éducation, formation cet après-midi, mélangés avec des temps de réflexion sur l'éthique. Et ce soir, nous avons un spectacle. Alors c'est devenu un peu une marque de fabrique de MIAI, d'avoir des spectacles et des actions avec des collègues du monde de l'art. Je dis collègues, c'est un terme à prendre au sens large, mais on a travaillé sur des projets avec des artistes, pas avec cet artiste-là en particulier, mais vous verrez, c'est un spectacle qui est aussi en lien avec l'IA. Et nous aurons un cocktail ensuite. Et puis, demain, il y aura un temps innovation. Donc, MIAI, c'est trois branches. C'est une branche recherche scientifique, qui est fondamentale, une branche innovation, et quand on parle d'innovation, on parle aussi de transfert de technologie, j'y reviendrai, et une branche formation. Et donc là, vous avez vu les 2 branches dans la première journée. Demain, nous aurons un temps dédié à l'innovation, et en particulier avec la remise du label MIAI à un certain nombre de startups. Et puis aussi des présentations, et là cette fois on élargit, et on est très content d'accueillir des collègues de Clermont-Auvergne et de Savoie-Mont-Blanc pour ça. Et on aura une intervention de Jérôme Petit-Poisson, qui est un général des sapeurs-pompiers, et qui viendra nous parler un petit peu des problématiques et de la possibilité, des possibilités qu'ouvre l'IA dans le monde du secours. Et puis l'après-midi, nous aurons un temps sur l'IA générative. Et enfin, nous clôturerons ces MIAI Days par l'Assemblée générale de MIAI, qui est ouverte à tout le monde. Voilà. Donc, peut-être juste quelques mots. Là, on peut passer à l'autre ordinateur. Je vais juste dire quelques mots. Je ne serai pas trop long. Quelques mots sur MIAI. Rappeler un petit peu les objectifs. Donc, les objectifs de recherche, de formation, d'innovation et puis d'interaction avec la société. Yacine disait que MIAI était essentiellement recherche. En fait, on a financé des actions formation et innovation, recherche et innovation. En fait, on a financé des actions de formation dès le début. Il se trouve que le gouvernement n'avait pas pu donner l'ensemble du budget formation aux 3 IA lorsqu'ils ont été créés. Donc, il y a eu cet appel à projet CMA qui a donné lieu à FLIA MIAI. Mais FLIA MIAI est entièrement intégré dans MIAI. C'est le bras formation de MIAI. Et puis, effectivement, pour la suite, les budgets sont là dès le début et n'arrivent pas l'un après l'autre, en fait. Donc, voilà, ces actions-là. Alors, les partenaires qu'on avait, les partenaires académiques qu'on avait, voilà cette liste de partenaires académiques. On a eu environ une centaine de partenaires privés, donc qui ne sont pas tous mentionnés, qui ne sont pas tous listés ici. Mais vous voyez qu'il y a eu une forte activité avec nos partenaires privés. Et ces partenariats privés, ça permet du transfert de savoir-faire, ça permet du transfert de technologie. Et on a eu plus de 160 projets collaboratifs avec eux, 17 startups créées, 2 laboratoires communs. Vous voyez le nombre de permanents, ça, ici, le nombre de permanents qui est donné, c'est le nombre de permanents académiques. On a aussi une petite centaine de permanents industriels. Alors, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire, ce nombre-là? Ça veut dire qu'il y a en permanence les mêmes 250 personnes qui travaillent, mais qu'on a des gens qui viennent dans MIAI, qui travaillent dans MIAI. MIAI reste un institut virtuel. MIAI Cluster sera également un institut virtuel, mais qu'on a une communauté assez large, d'au moins 250 personnes à n'importe quel moment de notre institut. Donc vous avez quelques chiffres aussi sur le nombre de chaires créées, le nombre de projets qu'on a soutenus, le nombre de publications, le nombre de brevets, puis quelques prix ici, et puis le nombre de personnes formées à l'IA. Alors juste pour vous donner une petite idée de l'impact qu'on a pu avoir, donc on est de loin, parmi les 3 IA, on s'est un petit peu comparé aux autres 3 IA pour faire un bilan de notre institut. On est de loin le 3 IA qui a le plus publié. Et ce qui n'est pas surprenant, parce qu'on est aussi le 3 IA qui est le plus intégrateur. C'est-à-dire que c'est le plus rassembleur. Donc on a beaucoup plus de personnes dans notre institut que dans les autres instituts. Donc il n'est pas surprenant de voir que nous sommes celui qui a le plus publié. Mais si on regarde le nombre de citations moyennes par article, d'accord, on est quand même en tête. Donc non seulement on a le plus publié, mais on a aussi très bien publié en termes de qualité, avec un impact de nos publications qui est supérieur à celui des autres 3 IA. Et on a fait une petite comparaison avec un ensemble de centres d'IA en Allemagne qui s'appelle la Cyber Valley. Et on voit que donc MIAI est en rouge ici, la courbe de publication, donc c'est le nombre de publications ramené au nombre de personnes impliquées, de chercheurs impliqués. Ils sont encore plus nombreux que nous dans cette réunion d'institut. Et vous voyez qu'en 2019, lorsqu'on a commencé MIAI, on était en dessous de cette union d'instituts, puis qu'ensuite on a continué, on les a dépassés et on continue à avoir une courbe croissante. Voilà, donc ça c'était pour vous donner quelques éléments, pour vous dire un petit peu tout ce qui avait été fait. Donc vous avez vu les chiffres qui étaient donnés. Je rappelle juste ici les trois jambes de MIAI en fait, hein, science, formation, innovation. Et puis donc la gouvernance reflète cela avec un comité, un bureau exécutif qui essaye de coordonner ces actions-là. Alors au cœur de MIAI, on avait toutes les thématiques qu'on trouve au cœur de l'IA, donc les architectures matérielles et embarquées, l'apprentissage, le raisonnement, la perception, l'interaction, donc qui recouvre la robotique, le traitement automatique des langues, la vision par ordinateur, mais aussi l'IA et la société. Donc l'IA et la société, pour nous, a été une activité très cœur, puisqu'on a essentiellement financé, dans une première phase, des recherches dans lesquels l'IA était l'objet d'étude. Donc c'était des collègues juristes, des collègues sociologues, des collègues philosophes qui se penchaient sur l'IA et c'était leur regard sur l'IA qu'on mettait en avant. Donc c'est une activité qu'on a mise tout de suite au cœur de MIAI. Et on a eu 3 domaines d'application qui sont la santé, l'environnement et l'énergie et l'industrie 4.0. Là, ce transparent-là vous donne juste une idée des budgets consacrés à ces différents domaines. Donc le budget le plus conséquent a été au cœur de MIAI, suivi du domaine de la santé, de l'environnement et l'énergie et de l'industrie 4.0. Alors, le fait que l'industrie 4.0 soit un peu moins financée que les autres, ce n'était pas étonnant. C'est lié à des contraintes qu'on avait pour développer cela, des contraintes qui étaient liées à des partenariats avec l'Allemagne, indispensables pour pouvoir prétendre à avoir des chaires dans ce domaine-là. On n'a fait là-dessus que suivre les règles édictées par le gouvernement. Bon, bien sûr, des collaborations internationales assez fortes, je vais passer assez vite. Sur les aspects formation, un des gros travaux qui a été fait, ça a été de recenser les formations en IA, de créer des labels Cœur IA, des labels application de l'IA, d'intégrer, de développer de nouveaux cours en IA, d'intégrer dans les cours existants de l'IA et du coup de formaliser un petit peu ces labels qui sont des diplômes universitaires, en fait, qui donnent lieu à des diplômes universitaires, les formaliser en termes de compétences acquises et attendues, et en termes en termes de formation associée à ces différents labels, de volume de formation et de volume de pratique des étudiantes et des étudiants. Et bien sûr, une action aussi sur la formation continue, et il y aura une table ronde dédiée à la formation continue qui abordera ces différents aspects. En termes d'innovation, ce que je vous disais, c'est qu'on travaille au quotidien avec un nombre conséquent de partenaires industriels, de partenaires privés, ce qui veut dire qu'il y a du transfert de savoir-faire, du transfert technologique, du co-développement, de la recherche en commun qui est faite. Donc ça, je dirais, c'est une activité quotidienne au sein de MIAI. Et il y a eu aussi un effort important de fait sur l'identification et l'aide à la création l'identification de projets pouvant donner à des startups et l'aide au montage de startups. Tout ça, bien sûr, en collaboration avec les acteurs du site. Je pense à Floralis, je pense à INPSA, puis je pense à la SATT, à INRIA Startup Studio ou à son équivalent CEA. Tous ces acteurs-là sont membres du bureau scientifique de MIAI. Je l'ai perdu. Tous ces acteurs-là sont membres du bureau scientifique de MIAI et portent ces actions-là, bien sûr. Bon, je vais passer rapidement là-dessus, des groupes transverses, simplement pour vous dire pour revenir sur cette action IAIR qu'on a eue et qu'on aura peut-être encore dans le futur. C'était une action qu'on n'avait pas vraiment anticipée, mais ça a été un plaisir que de développer ces collaborations avec différents artistes. L'animation, c'est un point très important de notre institut. Je pense que c'est quelque chose qu'on va devoir renouveler dans MIAI Cluster. Il se passe tellement de choses en IA qu'il est impossible pour une personne, voire même une petite équipe, de suivre tout ce qui se passe. Interagir, connaître les bonnes pratiques, savoir si cette technologie est pertinente ou pas pour tel ou tel problème. C'est la seule façon d'arriver à ce résultat-là, d'arriver à cette connaissance, ça passe par la discussion, l'interaction avec un ensemble très, très, très large de collègues. Et donc on avait initié ces MIAI meetings mensuels pour cela, et je pense qu'on va continuer à avoir, et avec une animation assez forte, avec d'autres éléments, je ne vais pas tous les lister ici, mais je pense que ça sera encore une action assez importante dans le futur. Voilà, juste peut-être pour terminer, vous présenter très très rapidement MIAI Cluster en 2 slides en fait. Donc d'abord pour dire que en termes de partenariat privé, on espère bien pouvoir continuer à travailler avec les partenaires qu'on avait, puis avoir de nouveaux partenaires. En termes de partenariat académique, on retrouve tous les partenaires de MIAI phase 1 avec, comme on le disait, la jonction de l'université Clermont-Auvergne et celle de l'université Savoie-Mont-Blanc. Et cette fois, la thématique qu'on met en avant, c'est cette thématique-là. Donc, c'est un institut pour une IA embarquée, générative, interactive, qui soit frugale et de confiance par construction, et toujours au service de l'humain et de l'environnement. Frugalité, confiance sont des actions transversales. Au cœur IA, on réorganise un tout petit peu le cœur IA en gardant bien sûr apprentissage et raisonnement et les aspects matériels et embarqués, mais en reprenant un tout petit peu les aspects perception et interaction sous la forme interactive and generative AI, donc IA générative interactive. La partie IA et société devient un peu un socle qu'on espère être plus large et sur lequel plus de personnes pourront s'appuyer dans le futur. Donc on retrouve quand même ici les actions autour du juridique, dans ces deux aspects-là, de sociologie, philosophie, et puis de travail de personnes spécialisées dans l'usage des technologies. On retrouve les trois grandes applications qu'on avait et qui sont renforcées par rapport à ce qu'on avait pu voir. Je pense que le fait d'avoir eu MIAI a permis à un certain nombre de communautés de comprendre, enfin, je ne sais pas si c'est ce qui a permis de comprendre, mais en tout cas de se dire qu'il était possible de développer des actions en IA sur le site dans des communautés applicatives. Et donc, on a beaucoup de collègues de ces communautés-là qui ont répondu présent lorsqu'on a parlé du montage du cluster. Et il y a quelques applications, domaines applicatifs émergents qu'on aimerait bien regarder d'un peu plus près. Le premier, c'est lié à l'éducation. On a déjà une chaire qui a été créée dans le cadre de MIAI dans ce domaine-là, qui sera présentée ce matin. Un autre point qu'on aimerait bien regarder, qui est beaucoup plus prospectif, c'est les liens entre le quantique et l'IA. Il y a des liens qui essayent d'être tissés par la communauté, par différentes communautés de recherche. Ces liens sont encore très ténus, mais je pense que c'est notre rôle aussi en tant que scientifique d'essayer d'explorer des pistes potentielles autour de cela. Et enfin, il y a le monde des industries culturelles et créatives, et qui sont en particulier présentes sur le bassin Savoie-Mont-Blanc. Donc c'est aussi un monde avec lequel on a peu de liens pour l'instant, mais duquel on aimerait se rapprocher. Alors, bien sûr, ces domaines applicatifs-là ont un périmètre bien moindre que celui-là. Les marchés sont certainement moins importants, mais ce sont des opportunités qui nous semblent intéressantes pour la suite. Voilà, je crois que j'ai fini. Donc je vous remercie pour votre attention. Je vais passer la parole ensuite aux présentations scientifiques. Si vous avez une ou deux questions, je veux bien les prendre, mais sinon on pourra discuter par la suite. OK. Oui, puis j'en profite pour vous dire, avant de passer vraiment au vif du sujet, c'est-à-dire le travail qui a été réalisé au sein de MIAI, plus en détail, pour vous dire qu'on a une équipe MIAI assez forte, je trouve. Donc il y a Tang ici présent, qui est le directeur formation, Sophie ici présente, qui est la directrice scientifique, Philippe Brun, qui est le directeur innovation, qui n'a pas pu être présent aujourd'hui. Et sinon, il y a Emeline Langlois, voilà, donc responsable administrative de MIAI. Et puis on a deux personnes qui sont Snejana, que beaucoup connaissent déjà, et puis Maria, au fond, qui aide beaucoup, donc qui sont en assistance à la partie management opérationnel de MIAI. Et on va bientôt accueillir Astrid, qui doit être aussi dans la salle dès le 1er juillet, et qui travaillera sur les parties innovation. Voilà, donc on a une petite équipe sur laquelle on peut s'appuyer et sur laquelle on s'est appuyé pour ces MIAI Days. Et je peux vous dire que c'était très agréable d'avoir ces personnes sur lesquelles s'appuyer. Voilà, donc je vous propose qu'on passe tout de suite à la partie présentation scientifique. Et donc on va accueillir Christophe Prieur, qui est directeur de recherche au CNRS, qui a reçu la médaille d'argent du CNRS très récemment, et donc qui porte la chaire AI Bot au sein de MIAI, et qui va nous parler en partie des travaux de cette chaire-là. Merci Christophe.
Okay, merci Eric pour cette présentation et cette introduction. So I will switch to English if you don't mind. So let me start first. Okay, it seems to work. Okay. So thank you, Eric, for the introduction. So it is just a very close and very tiny activities set with respect to the large MIAI Institute. So I'm very happy to be there to present the activities of this chair. But so this is just one example of what we can do in a very large institute of MIAI. So the title is a database observation and control strategy for uncertain systems. So every word is important here. So we will do observations and control there. So I don't know if I should go to the right or to the left. So maybe I will switch from left to right. So and the word which is very important is uncertain. So I will try to ensure some robustness issue when using some data, but not only when using some data. You know that all data are very noisy, so we need to ensure some robustness. So this is very important aspects. So in particular for this kind of application, so here this is an example of the Gulf of Mexico. This is the deep horizon. I don't know if we can move the small box away. I don't know. So this is a disaster that has been that occurs quite recently, where we were able to collect many data. Okay, thanks. Where we were able to collect many data and to interact this data with complex fluid dynamics, dynamical systems. And the goal was to use this big data to predict the disaster and to predict how flows involve, and to use both data and physics to do that. And the physics was quite challenging because it was infinite dimensional dynamics, it was a very large scale dynamics with many nonlinearities and very expensive in terms of computations. And so here it is a very general slide. So let us consider a dynamical system. So what is a dynamical system? It's just a system whose state involved with respect to the time. So the time is in this slide, almost everywhere in this slide, discrete. And ST is the state which is unknown, so we don't know the state. So this state could be infinite dimensional, it could be very difficult to predict, to detect. But we have some action. So action is denoted by A time t, and we have some measure. So this is just a partial measure of the current state. And of course, there are perturbations everywhere. So perturbation is denoted WT in this slide. So it could be given by a nonlinear physical model, so I don't know, Newton's law or something like that, but it could be a partial differential equation with uncertainty. It could be also given by some data. And the classical problems that we will try to solve today is how to learn ST from just the measure of YT, and how to compute a policy AT, so that the S of t, or the output of this dynamical system, follows some reference. So in a control perspective, it's just to writing that is just to say how to observe ST collecting all the data YT, and how to compute l'optimal policy. So of course, it is good to compute one policy, but it is better to compute the optimal one with respect to some cost. And this problem in this slide is very, very easy to solve if we have very strong structural assumption as linear dynamics. So if F and H maps are just linear, it is very easy. So everyone can do that. But if it is very general, non-linear, infinite dimensional, uncertain, it is still a challenging open problem. And so the outline is to do that for two classes of systems. So the first one is database systems. So we will try to see how control techniques and machine learning approaches interact, and we are able to combine both techniques to solve the industrial applications. So we'll see that after. So the first one is an application for which we have many data. And the second one is a physics-based problem for which we have no data. So it is exactly the opposite side. But we have a very well-known physical dynamical model, but it is very challenging. And we will illustrate that on the fluid dynamics, and again with robustness with respect to noise. So it could be different noises. And I will probably skip the third part, and showing that we can be also useful not only for policy computation, but also for observation problems. So the first one is the control of stutter waves. So this kind of waves, in fact, everyone knows this wave because we are using such industrial devices in many industrial systems. So there is a small waves here that you can toggle. Okay, you can regulate with respect to some reference, and you want to open it full, like here, or you want to close it, or maybe in the middle between 0 and 1. And the goal is to control all this wave by means of modulation of the voltage. Okay, so this is a very challenging problem because there are many different kind of waves, and in fact, in a given class of waves, all waves are completely different. So they will have different dynamics. So and we are doing that in a joint project with Huawei. And so if you are looking for time response of this application and this real experiments, you can see the following time response. So in blue, it is your control, your input, and in orange color, it is the output. So this is the angle of the wave. Okay. So you can see that there are some nonlinearity, because if you multiply by the input by 2, it does not give you twice outputs, of course. And there are many uncertainties, because one input does not give you a unique output. Okay. And we can see also some hysteresis. So what does it mean? It just means that if the signal depends on the past. So there is a memory effect as well. So you see, hysteresis is typically like that. So if you come like that, you increase the input. It does not decrease the output, and at some time it decreases the output. And if you want to increase again the output, you have to cross a very large area. And so there is this memory effect, there is a hysteresis. And again, there is some large uncertainties, because you can see that the hysteresis effect is not deterministic. Okay, and again, all waves are different. So here it is the previous one, so this is wave number 2. But if you look on the time response of different waves, it will give you completely different approaches, completely different time response. So the model is, so there is no model. And there is non-model dynamics with many nonlinearities, hysteresis, and also uncertainties. So this is a quite challenging problem to follow a reference signal. So what can traditional control do? So if you are an engineer, you will not be surprised by this slide. So if we come back to the system, and if we assume that the system is linear, as I said before, it is an easy problem to solve. So let us assume that the dynamics is given by linear equation like that, and the output function, so your measure, is given by this linear map. Again, WT is uncertainty. So a very good idea is how to compute the action so that S of t is following some given trajectory, is to use a proportional controller. So to do that, we just compute the error. So this is just the error. This is the difference between the output of the state, of the dynamics, and the reference that you want to follow. Okay? So a good idea is to use a proportional policy. So by given a positive feedback K or a negative feedback K, either you have to encourage policy or to dissipate energy. So this is two opposite cases. But in fact, there are some perturbation, WT. So if you just use proportional, you can see that the state is following this dynamics. So it may happen that the asymptotic error is small, so it gives you a small action. So it gives you a small offset in the output trajectory. So what does it mean? More precisely, it just means that the asymptotic value of the output is just the same as the reference that you want to reach, plus some offset, which is of course not desirable. So to do that, we have to make an integrator. So this is why I'm writing that in red, so that the integrator saves the day. Why? Because it just accumulates the small errors that you are along the trajectory, along the data, and so it is better not to use only a proportional control, proportional policy, but also to use an integrator. So this is done in this work of Emmanuel Vitran, Johan Lando, and this colleague for one wave only. So to be more precise, they use a linear dynamics like that. So here it is just the same, but with a time horizon which is given by n, okay, here, and an action which is horizon which is given by this integer m. And we want to do that by, we can compute this linear dynamics by a linear model by solving in a very easy way least square criterion region. So it is just by comparing the output of that you are measuring with the waves and the output of the state of this linear model. And then in this problem, they were able to compute a proportional controller, so which is given by Kp of 80, as in the previous slide, plus an integrator. So in the integrator, it is a very easy integrator. It's just an integrator with a time horizon of 1. Okay, so you just add two contributions. The first one is proportional control, proportional policy, and integrator policy. But of course, if we can do that, this is done in this very nice work, but it is not optimal, and we need very strong assumption on the dynamics because we need a linear model for that. And as we have seen, the system is non-linear and with hysteresis and something like that. So this model is very nice, but is quite naive and not sufficient to do that. So this is why we use approximation policy iteration to enrich the previous contribution. To do that, we just follow a very classical approach by defining a reward like that. So the reward is nothing more than the difference between the state and the reference of the reference that you want to reach. Okay, so you have just to estimate this quantity. So this is just the distance square, the square distance of your objective. And we define the Q-value function in a very classical way, where we have a gamma factor there between 0 and 1. And we were able to develop a TD3 algorithm, as in this conference paper, based on the following Bellman operator. So Bellman operator is just the same as what you know. It is just the expectation of the reward plus gamma of the Q-value function. And of course, the Bellman function operator we don't know precisely, so we need to approximate it by using some parameters that are denoted on this slide, omega and theta. And the theta parameter is used to parameterize the policies that you want to compute. And to do that, it works very well, but we need a lot of data. And also, we need to do that for each wave. So from this real perspective, it is not suitable because we want to do that for one wave and then to apply it for a bunch of waves, not to do that using each individual waves. So this is why in this work with Paul Daoudi and the industrial partner, we were able to use a so-called strict action guided. So what does it mean, strict action guided? It is used on an additional hyperparameter, which is given by this lambda function. So what does it mean, this lambda function? It just means that if the state is satisfying this kind of inequality, it just means that if the state is around the reference, then the PI control is very good. Why? Because we are close to the reference, for which we have a good linear model. So this strict action guided policy helps you to switch between two policies, the one given on the previous one and the one given by the PI control PI policies that have been designed in a different approach. So by doing that, we just modify the Q-value function given on the previous slide, and we were able to exploit local optimal policies as coming from PI policies, and we were able to combine that with classical reinforcement learning techniques and the previous slide by using any parameterized policy. So, and let us look on what does it work. The answer is yes, it works on the learning phase and the control phase, and also it gives you a better robustness, and if we do not that, by combining both policies. So let us see that on the learning phase. On the learning phase, so the result is not incredible. So we have to be modest, of course, but the learning phase is given by this slide. So you can see that if we just use a pure reinforcement learning techniques, it gives you this kind of learning, so that we have the cost function, which is just decreasing after some quite large of episodes. But if you use both, the learning phase is better. It is not fantastically better, but it is anyway, it is a little better than classical reinforcement learning techniques. And what about the time responses of different waves? So it is given by this slide, where we are comparing the reference signals that we want to follow. So this is like that. This is a change every 5 seconds. Okay. So we are switching between, I don't know, this angle 60 probably, and the angle something like 10. By using the PI policy, which is given in the magenta color, the pure reinforcement learning techniques was given by the green and the by combining both. So the first remark is that it works quite well on the wave 2 and the wave 3 as well, but not so well for the wave 1, even for the PI control. So the control policy is not very good actually. Why? Because the PI policy, you see that there is still a very large shattering when you use the PI policy. But if you combine it with a reinforcement learning policy, you do not have anymore the large shattering that you can see there, and also you can avoid the small offset that you have between the reference and the asymptotic value when you use the pure RL approach. So this is great, and you can see that the PI combined with RL give you the better result on that. And it works in similar way where you have to switch every 2 time seconds, which is closer to the applications than to the application. So here we have going faster and it still work. And actually, for the control perspective, it is very interesting because, again, the PI control is not working anymore. So we need AI for the PI policy. And what about robustness? So robustness, we can do that in very different ways, of course. So here in this slide, we try something crazy. We just learn from one wave, and we apply it on a different one. So it should work because it is very important because we have to see if we can learn from one wave and apply it on different ones. And it is the case that it works. So the orange line is the line that you have to look at. And the PI is, again, the controls that you should not look at. Why? Because the PI policy does not work. You see that it works for this change of reference, but it doesn't work here because of this the presence of the large shattering. But when you combine it with reinforcement learning techniques, we were able to avoid that. And here we change every 10 seconds. So it is very modest because it is quite far from the industrial objective, but it is still quite good. And another robustness issue is to deal with by looking on noises. So in the previous one was we changed the experiments, and here we add some noises, and we see the effect of the noise when on the measure and also on the actions. So we add some noises, and we see that looking on the plots of the mean square errors due to the external noise, that again the PI plus RL is slightly buffer. It is not overkilling the result. It is not out-performing the result. But anyway, it seems to be slightly better. And the second application that you would like to deal with today is this about fusion control. So it is an energy application that is very important in our team. And it is exactly the converse, because you know that fusion is very promising source of energy, but it is still under experiments, and we have no data. So it is exactly the converse. For the previous approaches, we have many experiments, and we can do as many experiments as you wish. And here it is the converse. We can do experiments, and we did that, but only after a very long process and after a very long discussion with physics applications. So this is the case of the fusion application, for which we have electric energy from nuclear and safe fusion phenomena. And we have to deal with a torus. So a torus is a large donut, let's say, and the control is given on the large boundaries of the. Okay, so you see that the yellow part is a donut that you have to control, and inside of that you have the plasma, which is shaped like surfaces, and you have to maintain the magnetic field inside of that. So here it is a picture of the ITER tokamak. It is still under construction, and here you can see a small body giving you the size of the tokamak that is still under progress in Cadarache in the south of France. But we were able to apply that on some smaller tokamaks, and we want to today I would like to show you that physics can help you to learn. Okay, what about the physics? So the physics is very complex. So the goal is not to give you the all details of that, but if here you can see a slice of the donut, okay, the large donut that you have to control. And in fact, what is very important is the rho variable. So the rho variable is just the radius, the small radius inside of uterus, and it gives you a parameter that gives you the shape of the some surfaces inside of this donut. Okay, so this here surfaces looks like banana if you think around the torus. And there is a very nice book of Jacques Blum in this book where you will see the next model. And the temperature is the one crucial state. You will see the other crucial state in the next slide. And the temperature is parameterized by the T, by the time, as usual, and also by this rho parameter, which is a small radius there. And here is the model. So the model is very complex. I don't want to deal with all details about that. So what is important in this? This is non-linear, okay? So the state is given by psi and T. So this is the electronic temperature that you have seen on the previous slide. And psi is related to the safety factor. So this is a very crucial variable that you have to control. And it's given by the nonlinear model. Why? Because there is a diffusion parameter which is given by that, which is depending on the state. Okay, so you have a product of the state by the state. So it is a nonlinear model. So this model is given by the physician. So it is very there is no doubt about that. This is correct, but it is very complex. It is a partial differential equation. Why? Because you have partial derivative with respect to the time, also partial derivatives with respect to the rho variable. The rho variable is the previous parameter on the banana inside of the donut. Okay. And it is in continuous time, but the continuous time is not a crucial issue. You can discretize with respect to the time and to get a discrete time system as usual for learning. And the control problem is to do as following: is to control the psi function, which is related to the safety factor, and to make it converging to a reference. Okay, so the goal is not to go to zero, of course. If you switch off all devices, due to the fusion phenomena, everything will go to zero. So the goal is to converge to some steady state, which is different to zero, and which is making some energy. Okay, so psi star is nothing that you have to compute. It is already given, but we have to compute the policy, which is given in the non-inductive current there, so that the psi converge to your equilibrium and stay around that. But unfortunately, as you can see, this model is non-linear. Is given by in an infinite-dimensional set, and it is too complex, and we have no real data. So this is out of a scope of reinforcement learning techniques and AI and everything like that. We cannot do AI on that. But so what we were able to do is to compute a reduced order model. So we, instead of considering the previous model, we compute a reduced order model, which was very useful for simulation and also for learning. And we had also a time integrator. So here the time integrator is given by this integral, but in discrete time it is just a discrete sum as usual. And you will see in a few seconds why this time integrator is very important. And then after that, we use reinforcement learning techniques on this reduced order model for simulations and equipped with the integrator to compute an optimal policy using these approaches. Okay, and then after that, we apply that not only on the previous model, but on a full physics simulator, which is so-called Raptor. So Raptor is a full physics simulator computed by physics, by physician, as done by Federico Felici and others. And this is a way to check that you're learning converge or not. And the reward function is given by that. So here the reward function is just the distance with respect to the equilibrium that you want to reach with a minus. Okay, so this is not crucial. So you don't want to minimize that, you want to maximize that, but it's not so crucial. And I forgot to say something, that alpha, here, alpha is the term that is in front of the integrator. So this alpha is a very important parameter for us. So we will see that the integrator is important. And you will see also that on this slide that the learning technique, so here it is the result of the training, of the learning. And you can see that the training is quite sensitive with respect to the alpha parameter. So if alpha is 25, then we have the orange line. If alpha is very large, then you have the red one. And so the largest integral action is the cost, the largest, the more difficult is the training. And this is something that we were able to apply on the Raptor simulator. And this is joint work with Paolo Frasca and Andrea Mattioni. And we simulate that on a simulation of 10 seconds with some reference at this time. And we see that. So here it is a part of the state. So remember that the state is an infinite dimensional one. So we have a psi which is depending on t and also on the rho variable. So there is an infinite number of figures that I should show you. But here I just show you 4. For rho equals 0, rho equals 0.1, etc. And you can see that the output of the simulator reach the reference even if you change the reference from time to time. So here the dynamics is very fast. So you have to change the reference every 2 seconds or even faster to see that it works. And it works indeed. And let us look on the robustness. So to do that, we had some disturbance on the simulator to see what happens. And we apply a disturbance at 1 point. And remember, so we apply that at 0.25. And we apply this disturbance at t equals 5.5. And we had that with an integrator. So remember that the integrator was very useful to ensure some robustness. And in fact, it works. And you can see that even in presence of the disturbance, you converge to the reference for this output. But it does not work for the others. So if you want to ensure the robustness also in the other points, you need to add an integrator dedicated to each point. Okay, so here we did just add one integrator. This is why we ensure a robustness issue, robustness property at this point precisely. So the take-home message is the following: was that the integrator saves the day again. So maybe this is a take-home message of today, that if you have some troubles, integrate. And again, and a large integral action gives you a good robustness. So this is a very good news for the robustness property. So we have to integrate with a large factor, but recall that the training cost is quite large. So there is, of course, there is nothing for free. You have to train more if you want to ensure more robustness. Yeah, perfectly. Thanks, Eric. So by doing that, to sum up, we compute a reduced order model plus learning plus control with integrator. So I will probably skip this part. I was expecting that it was too long. It is about navigation problem where we were able to do some experiments to show that adapting the covariance matrices were inside of a Kalman filter was very useful for a navigation problem. Okay, even on a very long trajectory. Okay, to conclude, so you have seen some database control approach for observation and action objectives, and you have seen that some experiments can give the data, or physics-based physical models can give you good values. And when the physics is too complex, you can also think about a reduced order model and to compute artificial data, let's say. And we apply that on some experiments with industrial setups on a full simulator coming from physics. So I remember that Eric explained that MIA is matching is a Japanese word, and here AI is also MIA is also a good way to see the matching of control and AI. So by that, I would like to conclude this, and I would like to thank all the collaborators that have been cited in this presentation. So here it is the permanent colleagues, and here it is PhDs and postdocs. Thanks.
We have time for a few questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Christophe. It was very nice. So it's very tempting to combine AI and physics, and it's up to date,
Yeah.
state of the art at the moment.
I'm
But
not
on
the
the
first one.
first
Yes.
example, you showed that it's improving, but not a lot.
Yes.
What do you think? What would be the perspective to really improve?
I'm not sure that we can outperform that what we are doing with only physics and with only RL.
Okay.
So probably the perspective is just to keep that in mind. And now, of course, we have to do that physics-based approaching physics-based learning is probably something that we have to do at first. And I'm not sure that we can forget. I have 2 legs, and I cannot forget one of my legs to walk.
Okay.
So the perspective is just probably not to forget one approaches, but to keep both in parallel. I don't know if you, of course, you are also an expert on that. Physics-based learning is very crucial.
Nice, thanks.
One more question. Okay, so I'll ask it. So what for the future? Where is this going? Where do you see?
Yeah. Okay. So the future is probably to think about So there is also many works. So it could be nice also. You have seen some techniques, and now for using linear models, it could be nice also to use what we know on non-linear models to see how we can complete the matching between AI and control using non-linear approaches. Here, everything is more or less linear, at least what I presented today. So probably there is also many things to do, keeping in mind the non-linearity in the learning as well, and in the control as well.
Okay. Okay, so let's
Thanks
thank
for
again our speaker. Thank you very much, Christophe. So I'm now going to invite Salome. So Salome is going to talk about a new chair on personalized educational content considering cognitive variables, relevance and acceptability. Sorry. So you have, let's say, 25 minutes. 20. But let's reserve some time for questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Salome Cogent, and I'm glad to be here today to present you the TEPAIA project. It doesn't work. Yep. It worked really great. Okay. We will talk about AI in education. AI in education, in particular, about the consideration of cognitive variables in the personalization of content, and teachers' perception about such tools, AI tools in particular. So this is a TEPAIA project, the TEPAIA chair. TEPAIA stands for Technologies Used in Pedagogy with AI Adaptations. I am the head of the TEPAIA chair since September 2023, so it's just the beginning of the chair. To quickly introduce myself, I'm an associate professor in educational sciences at Grenoble-Alpes University, and I have a PhD in cognitive psychology from the University of Rennes in Brittany. I work on learning processes and strategies and the design of learning environments that promote effective learning strategies and processes. In this chair, I work with researchers in psychology, especially Mathieu Pinelli, who is here today, and also colleagues in computer sciences, especially CM Ameria, Nassim Boirour, Noah Ibrahim, and Maël Morange. So in the 30s, 50s, 2 researchers, Prese and Skinner, developed learning machines to help students learn at their own pace progressively. And since then, with the evolution of technologies, new educational tools were developed. But the aim of these tools always remains the same. It has always been to personalize learning to each learner capacity and to reduce teachers' workload to let them focus on social aspects with students, for example. And AI is finally just a new technology that may improve the efficiency of such tools. So far, personalized learning has mainly been considered as adaptation based on performance without considering very much cognitive variables such as motivation or working memory capacity. And even if it's presented as a benefit, reducing teachers' workload can be considered as trying to reduce their work, and this fear of replacement, of job loss, may impair the acceptability of such tools by teachers. And when talking about AI tools, ethical concerns are also often mentioned. So the question is, how do they impact the intention to use these tools? These two lines of research, personalization of content, considering cognitive variables, and acceptability, considering ethical concerns, are explored in the Tupaya project. So the first part of this presentation is about personalization of video content to cognitive capacities and recommendation of videos. We focused on videos, on educational videos, because research already showed that videos have many benefits on learning processes, for example, in terms of multimodality, but also have many constraints, and the major constraint of educational video is the transitory aspect of information I will talk about just later. If we want the AI tool to adapt to cognitive variables, we need to know which variables are relevant to consider, which variables actually impair learning, impact learning, not impair, well, it works also, and which adaptation to provide. So the major difference between reading a text and watching a video is when we read the text as expert readers, we are all expert readers, we spontaneously adjust the reading pace to our capacities. We slow down, we reread some words, we make pauses between sentences when it's too complex, for example. But when watching a video, the pace is imposed. So information disappears when new information is displayed, and we have to maintain in working memory information that is no longer available to integrate it, to understand it, with new information. This transitory aspect of information is cognitively costly. It generates cognitive load in working memory, and when it's too costly, it can exceed our working memory capacity, and we are in cognitive overload. There are individual differences in working memory capacity. So some learners, we will call them low working memory capacity learners, are in cognitive overload sooner than high working memory capacity learners. There is a solution to avoid cognitive overload. It is to make pauses during a video learning. Pauses are beneficial to learners because this is the opportunity to adjust the pace, to stop processing new information and just have the time to integrate the previous information. But the question is, do we let learners make pauses when they want, or do we impose pauses? To answer this question, we conducted 2 experimental studies with Matthew John Tupaya in September 2023. In the first study, we wanted to see if learners who take notes make more pauses than learners who do not. So we recruited 66 participants via the Prolific platform to learn a 10-minute video about biology. They were distributed among 2 conditions. They were allowed to take notes or not. Results showed that there were no significant differences in terms of learning performance, and there were also no significant differences for pauses. In both conditions, more than 60% of learners did not make any pause during the 10-minute video, and 25 to 30% made only 1 or 2 pauses. So whether they could take notes or not, they did not make any pause. So there is a necessity to impose pauses to learners because, and this is a result that is really coherent with previous studies in psychology, learners don't know what is beneficial to them, especially in novices, and they struggle to regulate their own learning. So they don't know they need to make pauses, and they don't know when to do pauses. This study is also the opportunity for Maëlle Morange to explore the link between perceived cognitive load by learners and other variables such as their age, their prior knowledge, the time they spent learning, or the amount of notes they've taken. Analyses are ongoing. I cannot show you the results. In the second study, we hypothesized that imposing pauses will be beneficial, especially for low working memory capacity learners. This time, participants were 47 9-year-old students. We used a complex span task to evaluate their working memory capacity, and then they had to watch a 7-minute video about Napoleon. And finally, they had to answer memorization and comprehension questions after the video. Results showed that low working memory capacity learners, so they are on the left here, and here are high working memory capacity learners. So low working memory capacity learners benefit from imposed pauses and benefit more than high working memory capacity learners from imposed pauses. It means that imposed pauses reduce their cognitive load and increase their learning performance. Imposing pauses is even detrimental for high working memory capacity learners because these learners don't need the pace to be adapted. They can handle it. And unnecessary adaptations are negative to learners. So this second study shows the necessity to adapt the pace of the video depending on learners' capacities, depending on learners' working memory capacity. And we are currently recruiting adult learners for a third study. Based on these results, the objectives of the Tupaya project are to evaluate working memory capacity or to detect cognitive overload on the fly. The two are strongly linked in order to automatically adapt pauses depending on each learner capacities. Studies are still needed to estimate the optimal pauses characteristics. We need to present to each learner, for example, the optimal number of pauses during the video, their frequency, their length, etc. We will also investigate other adaptations that can be made depending on working memory capacity or cognitive load, or other individual differences to consider. On the computer science side, Nassim is currently working on video recommendation. For an effective recommendation, we expect that learning performance but also motivation are high. And we also consider perceived difficulty, but the aim is not to minimize it. Indeed, some studies showed that desirable difficulties are beneficial to learning. We still need to find which level of difficulty is optimal. And we are currently working on data collection because Nassim joined Tupaya only in January 2024. So designing an effective adaptive tool is great, but it's totally useless if teachers don't want to use it. So it's necessary to understand the factors impacting the acceptability of AI-based tools, to identify what could impair this acceptability and how we could improve it. Theoretical models of acceptability generally identify several factors impacting the intention to use systems. The two most important factors, according to the most common used models, are perceived usefulness, also called performance expectancy, and perceived ease of use, also called effort expectancy. Recent studies also mention the importance to consider ethical concerns such as privacy, trust, or perceived control. We addressed these questions with colleagues of universities of Montpellier and Toulouse in a previous project called Ariane for acceptability and representation of AI in education. We asked almost 400 teachers to judge either an AI edtech or an edtech. We did not provide any description of the potential edtech or AI edtech. It was just questions like, do you think an AI edtech is useful? Results showed that AI edtech was perceived generally as more effective in terms of teachers' reduction of workload or reduction of inequities between students, for example, but also as less ethical and more threatening in terms of job replacement. Overall, teachers declare more intention to use edtech than AI edtech. We are currently exploring the differences between elementary and secondary school teachers. In the Tupaya project, we wanted to investigate the importance of the factors of acceptability among university students, depending on their study program. in collaboration with Alexandra Salou from Aix-Marseille Université, we administrated a questionnaire to 96 students of educational science, so they are mostly future teachers, or computer science. They represented 14 design principles that can be considered when designing an AI edtech. And there were, among these 14 design principles, 11 ethical factors, such as privacy, transparency, trust, etc., fairness, and 3 pragmatic factors. It was usefulness for teachers, usefulness for students, and ease of use. Participants had to select the 5 factors among these 14. They think they are the most important to consider when designing an AI edtech. Results show that priorities are slightly different, but they all are more interested in pragmatic factors. So more specifically, teachers want the AI edtech to be useful and easy of use before everything else. To complete these results, we also plan to experiment an ethical machine. If you know the moral machine, it's just like the moral machine. To do so, we plan to confront participants to choices, to different situations. For example, they will have to choose between an ethical principle or a pragmatic factor. Do you prefer to lose 10% of privacy or to lose 20% of ease of use? Or between association? Do you prefer to lose 10% of privacy and to lose 20% of ease of use, or to lose 25% of transparency and 10% of control? We could also imagine presenting them dilemmas. You lose 50% of privacy, but you increase the ease of use by 20%. Do you still intend to use the tool? Do you know what to use the tool? So the aim is to experimentally identify the weight of each factor and the order of importance of each one. This experimentation is planned for 2025. Thank you. I think I'm on time. I hope this presentation was clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very nice presentation. We have time for some questions? Yes.
With respect to the last experiment, do you plan to ask the question like this, or do you put themselves in a situation where you will do this?
I don't know. I still don't know. It's just a project. Maybe we can, but it's difficult to imagine a real tool, so maybe just to project. I don't know, we also need to explain what privacy is. So sometimes, so it's just a project. I still don't know. In the moral machine, it's very easy. Do you know the moral machine? You have to choose in an autonomous car which choice to do when there is an accident. So do you prefer to crash with a dog or with a young
Yeah, exactly. In this case, you are put in situation where if you look at this, I have no idea what 50% privacy means. I guess no one knows.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is a challenge. I know that. We need to think about it,
Thank you for the presentation. I find this very interesting, but at the same time, I'm wondering about the word acceptability throughout the presentation, because TAM and UTOUT are actually about acceptance. And I can decide to accept a technology that I know is not acceptable. For instance, many people know that Facebook causes issues of privacy, right? But we still use it. So is it acceptable? A lot of people would tell you, no, it's not. But do they accept it and do they use it? Yes, they do. And that's where the paradox actually is. So I think we need to be, I find it fascinating, and I really like, what you're thinking about doing as well. But I think we need to be careful. Acceptance and acceptability are not the same.
Yeah. You're totally right, and I agree with you. Acceptability is before use, and acceptance is after use. Theoretical model links the two, but acceptability is the intention to use. But for teachers, the intention to use is really important, because they think now they don't use AI tools. In reality, they already use AI tools, but they think they do not, and do they plan to use it or not is the first step. And after this, yeah. Yeah. Mm-mm-mm. Yeah. 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 But it's interesting what you said, because finally, just what you said about Facebook is what we showed about the importance of ethical factors compared to the pragmatic factors. And we can't, if we want the tool to be used, we can't just focus on ethical concerns, because it needs to be useful before that. And we can't reduce the usefulness to increase the ethical, or it won't be really used. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Thank you. One last question. So maybe a very quick question. So when you ask the question between AI EdTech and EdTech, it was not clear to me how the question was asked. AI EdTech is still as EdTech, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that at the beginning.
Yeah.
That the right place of AI is just in the continuation of what was done in this field.
I did not show here, but there are other studies we made. In fact, just the term AI is linked to judgment specific
and
to AI.
That was just that.
Yeah.
Just the term. No specificity. No specific description.
Just an AI EdTech or just traditional EdTech.
Okay.
AI is full with negative judgments.
Connotations. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. We can sing Salome again. Thank you very much. Okay, the last speaker of this session will be Misaki Osawa. So, and Misaki is going to talk about multi-scale energy-based generative modeling in physics applications. So you have 15 minutes and then 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Misaki Ozawa. I'm a CNRS researcher working at RIFI, which is a laboratory for interdisciplinary study among physics, chemistry, and biology. Personally, I'm working on interdisciplinary study between physics and machine learning. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for giving me a chance to talk about our work. Today, I'd like to talk about multi-scale energy-based generative modeling in physics application. So this work is in collaboration with Tanguy Marchand. He's a medical data scientist in a medical tech company, Okin, and Giulio Biroli and Stéphane Mara, they are professor at the ENS Paris. Probably most of you heard about generative model, but in this slide, I'm going to explain briefly what is generative model by using very simple, famous example about image from Hollywood celebrity, faces of Hollywood celebrity. So suppose that you have a data set of these faces, then you wish to learn underlying probability distribution, P of X, by using your favorite machine learning techniques. But actually, this is quite difficult, but you can still do it. Then once you learn the underlying probability distribution, you can next generate new images, new faces that does not exist in the original training data set. In other words, you can generate new faces that does not exist in the real world. So this is an interesting point of generative model. And this generative modeling is very popular nowadays, as one can see in ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, etc., etc. Okay. Then our motivation of our study is to use this generative modeling for physics data. For example, magnetization field or density of dark matter in cosmology, etc., etc. So this is our motivation. Okay. I mentioned that generative modeling is very popular nowadays, but there are several problems. One notable problem is interpretability. Typically, people use complicated deep neural network approach to construct the underlying probability distribution, P theta of X. But typically, this is very complex, and it's very hard to interpret the result. Therefore, in our study, we use the so-called energy-based model, which is basically the probability distribution is given by exponential of minus energy function E theta X. And you have a normalization factor Z theta. Okay. So this energy function E theta can be very complex, like a deep neural network, but we employ the so-called physics-informed energy function. So we use the notion of physics similar to what Christophe mentioned this morning. So in this setting, the energy function is very simple. That has Gaussian term and nonlinear potential term. This is simple but complex enough to represent physical data in many physics domains. Okay. The merit advantage of this kind of simple setting is that we can interpret result quite easily compared with very tough deep neural network approach. Okay. Looks good. So how about this learning process? Okay, I'm going to explain. So actually, learning process is quite easy to understand. So basically, we wish to maximize the log likelihood. So this is expectation value of log likelihood. And to maximize this, so basically maximization of this with respect to the parameter theta, we perform a simple gradient ascent dynamics, as schematically shown here. So we want to find the optimal solution of theta. This looks good, but there is a big problem. Actually, the problem is the convergence of this gradient ascent is very, very slow when long-range correlation appear in images that you want to study. So the long-range correlation is, for example, in this image, is basically a very big yellow domain characterized by some length scale xi. So this kind of length scale often appear in a physics application. And when this xi is very large, the learning process is very, very slow, and it's impossible in practice. The reason is, roughly speaking, so the gradient term of the gradient ascent dynamics contain expectation value of the gradient of energy function. So to evaluate this term, one needs to perform Monte Carlo sampling with a very, very long time. It consumes a lot of CPU time. Besides, when the psi is very large, the correlation is very large, one needs to use a very tiny step size for gradient ascent. In other words, one needs to use very small learning rate. So this is the problem. And this problem is mathematically same as yield conditioned problem in computer science or numerical analysis, but essentially same mathematical problem appear also in physics, and this is called critical slowing down, which has been observed in a wide variety of physical phenomena. So basically, although they use different languages, two communities share the same mathematical problem. So therefore, to overcome this convergence problem, so we use the idea from the renormalization group method in physics. So this is a very powerful popular methodology in modern physics. So roughly speaking, so renormalization group manage to treat physical data in a scale by scale in a hierarchical way. So I'm going to explain briefly. So suppose that you have an image at the scale, original scale 0. So this can be decomposed into the coarse grain image, let's say x1, plus difference, let's say fine scale contribution x1 bar, and we do marginalization, integrating out only the fine scale contribution. Okay. Then again, we decompose the coarse grain image x1 into further coarse grain image, let's say x2, plus fine contribution. Then we make marginalization by integrating out only fine scale contribution. So we can repeat this process in a scale by scale manner hierarchically up to very large scale. So this method takes into account long range physics of long range interaction effectively, and it overcomes critical slowing down. So this is roughly the essence of renormalization group. So we, inspired by this renormalization group, we consider multi-scale decomposition of the original probability distribution function, P of x. P of x can be written by the joint probability distribution of x coarse-grained image x1 and the fine contribution x1 bar. And this can be written by the conditional probability distribution of x1 bar times marginal distribution. Then this marginal distribution again can be written by the conditional distribution of x2 bar, the fine contribution at the next scale, plus times marginal distribution at the scale 2. So you can repeat this process, and at the end of the day, you get sort of factorialization, decomposition of the original probability distribution by the product of the conditional probability distribution across scale. So this is a main idea. And we perform energy-based modeling for these conditional probability distribution across scale. In practice, to decompose the images into the coarse grain image and the fine contribution, we perform a wavelet transform. Okay. So this setting, combination of multi-scale decomposition and wavelet decomposition gives us a very efficient learning process, overcoming critical slowing down, making the problem well conditioned. Okay, so this is our main idea. So from now on, I'm going to explain our numerical experiment, numerical result, without going into too much detail. First, we study very famous, in physics, it's very famous model that is called the lattice phi-4 model that is used in a wide variety of physical systems. And sorry that the notation phi it corresponds to x in the previous slide. So just in physics, people often use phi. Okay, so anyway, so this setting corresponds to sort of justification or verification of our method. So our method successfully reconstruct underlying energy function in terms of Gaussian term and the nonlinear potential term. So this is good. So this learning process is good. So how about, what about generation process? So once we learn the energy function and the underlying probability distribution, we can generate new sample. But thanks to our multi-scale decomposition architecture, we can generate new sample hierarchically from very large scale, nearly Gaussian field down to the microscopic field. So this is conceptually similar to diffusion model, normalizing flow, etc. Anyway, our method successfully reproduce the images or configuration statistically and visually identical with the training data set. I do not have so much time to discuss, but our method is very fast. And if we quantify the efficiency, so our method is much faster than previous famous sampling algorithm. Okay. So once we verify our method in the well-known case study, we apply our method to cosmology, which is non-trivial and very challenging. Okay. In particular, we study the so-called weak gravitational ranging map, which is basically concentration or density of dark matter in the largest scale of the universe. Okay. Of course, we do not know the underlying probability distribution at all, and also we do not know energy function a priori. Nevertheless, our method successfully construct energy function in terms of Gaussian term and nonlinear potential. I'm sorry, again, I do not have time to discuss in detail, but for example, this second minimum can be interpreted as a concentration of dark matter in this yellow region. And the potential, this potential term can be interpreted effective long-range interaction due to gravity. For example, we can use a very good interpretation thanks to our setting of interpretability. Okay. So again, once we learn construct the underlying probability distribution, we can generate new data, new images, using large-scale fast Monte Carlo approach, and we confirm that our method successfully reproduce statistically and visually identical images as training data set. Okay, so let me conclude. So we study energy-based generative model application in physics. We use, in particular, physics-informed energy function, which is simple but complex enough to represent the physical data. These settings offers high interpretability of results. Our main idea is to introduce multi-scale decomposition inspired by the renormalization group idea in physics. And we combine wavelet theory to overcome critical slowing down or ill-conditioned problem in computer science. This is the learning part. And also generation part, our scheme offers new multi-scale fast Monte Carlo sampling to generate new data. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation. We have time for 1-2 questions. So, yes, Claude. And then I will give you the mic.
Claude Lepape from Schneider Electric. You insisted on interpretability. Have you been making, I don't know, some kind of experiment with users of the system that show that they feel comfortable with it? How do you evaluate it in the end? I agree it's more interpretable, the function is simpler than a neural network, but how do you...
So for the moment, this interpretability is very subjective. Yes, just, okay, I see this curve, I can interpret this, compare with the result. Yes, so quantification would be next level, and for the moment, I do not have any idea how to quantify. But this is interesting, and yeah.
Albert Cohen, Google DeepMind. You mentioned diffusion models. Did you experiment a little bit to compare with any classical diffusion technique?
Yeah, so we did not compare with diffusion techniques, but what I mentioned that just it's conceptually similar to the diffusion model in a sense that, so the reason why this kind of things is fast is that if you coarse-grain a lot, the histogram or distribution becomes more and more Gaussian. At a very large scale, effectively, it's almost Gaussian. And we can come back to the original configuration, which is highly non-Gaussian and with correlation. So we bridge between Gaussian and non-Gaussian. So this is conceptually similar to diffusion model. This is what I meant.
Okay. So if there are no more questions, then I propose we stop here. Thank you very much, Misaka, again. So we now have a coffee break, and I propose we resume at 11 sharp.